To shift gears a little bit, next question I'd like to ask is, what would you do to address what appears to be the divisiveness that seems to be affecting the decision-making in the town, going to so far as fostering a sense of cooperation and compromise, and moving projects forward, so we don't pit one group against the other one, we end up delaying and nothing gets done.
I think the divisiveness in the town has been really one of the most unfortunate results of basically the process to get us where we need to go in the next couple of years. North Reading is a great place, and I frankly, to digress just a little bit, when attending barbecues at Ipswich River Park this summer and seeing everyone together and having a good time and knowing some of the underlying divisiveness over the issues, that's really very sad to me, and I do think that it would behoove our entire community if we could end that and all compromise together. I think that, I hope the worst of the divisiveness is over. I think that the elementary school building committee, in looking at, very thoroughly looking at a plan for the batch and coming in as part of the process will be a big part to end that divisiveness. It should be very clear by April which plan makes sense. And then I would ask those on either side of the issue, whichever way it goes, to get on board and to all put our efforts toward one project. I hope, and I would also like to, I guess, again, communicate to taxpayers how much the divisiveness costs, and hope that you can compromise. Every selectman comes in with an agenda. I think my agenda is to get things done, not to see Project A done or Project B done to the extent that either makes sense, and they have to make fiscal sense and operational sense. I would be willing to go either place to get progress here, and I would hope to communicate the same to the community and the other members of the board.
Any questions from the audience?
I have a question which is back to the function of being a selectman, and that is, there's an old dictum that there is no authority in any selectman as an individual. The authority rests in the board. Now, for practical reasons, it becomes necessary from time to time for the chairman to speak on behalf of the board and communicating with the town administrator. How much of your authority do you think can be delegated to the chairman to act on behalf of the board between board meetings, and how much would you reserve for the board asking the chairman not to take a position vis-a-vis the town administrator, for instance, until the board has been polled on the question?
So just to clarify, the chair talking with the town administrator over an issue that he has maybe not polled the board on, is that?
That's correct. Something that has come up since the last board meeting, and that, in the opinion of the town administrator, needs to be decided before the next board meeting.
Mm-hmm. I think in probably 90% of the cases that I would trust the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to do business in between selectmen meetings on behalf of the board. I think that I would work well with the other members of the board. I think that I'm someone who communicates, so the chair would know generally my stance on things, generally when I trust him to speak on behalf of me as a member of the board, and not someone, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen takes on a big responsibility, and I don't think that it's generally productive to second guess him, and I would not do that. And I would also think that we could maybe have a qualitative discussion up front over what kinds of things that maybe he needs to poll or approach the board on before he goes to the town administrator, and what kind of things we don't. We operated in a similar way when I was a member of the elementary school building committee and we worked on the Hood School. We talked about what kinds of things, for example, the clerk of the works could decide on himself when they opened up a wall and saw the pipe in the wrong place, what kind of things he might have to talk to one or two members about, and then what kind of things we needed to bring before the whole committee before a decision could be made. So I think when you set out some general parameters and you have the trust and respect for your fellow committee members, I would really not have a problem with the chairman. I think he would act on my behalf in ways that he would know it's fine with me and the rest of the board, and in ways that I'm sure after the fact that I would support. Does that answer your question?
I assume, however, that you would expect him to report back to
Oh,
the board
absolutely.
at the next meeting exactly what happened and how the decision was arrived at.
Oh, yeah, I thought that was a given, absolutely.
All right, thank you. In the coming year, water rates appear to be another issue that we're going to be having to deal with, both internally within the town, but also Andover is discussing several options that they're going to be looking at for dealing with the cost of increasing water production. And they're primarily seeing that water production increase due to what they're selling to other towns. So a couple of the options they're looking at are either to cut out the sale of water to other towns or reduce it substantially, or doubling the rates and essentially passing on the costs of the build-up that they need to do on to other towns. As a selectman, what things do you think you can do to deal with what potentially could be water issues that we're going to run into?
Again, like other issues, I'll admit that I'm not as familiar with the water rate issues as perhaps some of the other issues, but it's something that if it's coming to pass, we should research, we should know our options. I think the first thing would be to know what our options are. If we should negotiate with Andover, if we should look to our own sources, if we negotiate with another town. I think we lay all our options before us as selectmen and then make the best judgment as we can in gathering the information.
Thank you. Ed?
Next question, excuse me, deals with traffic. Traffic is on the increase in the town's major arteries. Route 62 has become an alternate route for Route 128 east-west commute. Trying to enter 62 for those of us who have to drive on it during the rush hour times of the day, you're going across or whatever, it's becoming dangerous, and curious to know how you would balance the issue of traffic management with, for instance, in the center of town, the historical and the preservation of the historical look of the town, if you will, and deal with the traffic issues further down on 28 and 62, et cetera.
Well, I think many of those will begin to be addressed through the Route 62 reconstruction project, which goes out to bid, I believe, on March 19th, and with any luck may begin late this summer or next spring. There will be a traffic light as part of that at the intersection of 62 and Haverhill Street, and at the Park Freedom intersection. Again, I think that will go a long way toward the first step, and after we see that, if those two traffic lights don't adjust the flow, I think those are the two worst spots, often driving through at rush hour myself and feeling for how the people from Freedom Drive possibly get out of their street on some days and face that on a day-to-day basis. But I think that those will address the two high traffic areas. As for the historic district, as part of that, the wires through a grant will be put underground, so I think that could actually perhaps enhance it. Progress and history are always somewhat at odds, but safety comes first, and I think a traffic light in the center is necessary for safety.
Any other questions from the audience? Nope. All right. Well, I have plenty. Coming back to budgets and staffing, another issue or another item on the budget that seems to always be large, and it seems to be growing specifically over the last couple of years, is how do you plan on dealing with the growing commitment the town has towards town employee retirement? We've had a couple of bubbles, and it looks like we may have a couple more of large numbers of employees retiring. What methods do you have for funding this, or how have you thought about funding this because it's a requirement in the budget?
I guess in short, I think that's part of good overall planning, and that if, as part of a 5-year plan, or even longer than that, a 10-year plan, we need to have some set aside so that we're not hit with that on an annual or a semi-annual basis with surprises or numbers that we can't afford. So I guess I would propose to look at that as part of the overall budget and funding that on perhaps a level basis annually to have a fund that's available to to meet the needs as they occur.
And some people have said that one of the issues that we're dealing with in the building issues of both schools, police, we have others, the town garage, that a lot of this is coming from the fact that the town has grown and some might say has grown out of control, and that growth hasn't been limited. What are your thoughts on whether new growth ought or ought not be limited? Should we be attempting to preserve space and limit new growth? And what would you do as a selectman to implement that?
You can limit new growth only to the extent legally possible. If a developer owns a tract of property and it's legally, everything is legally in line for him to develop that, there's little you can do in telling him just not to do that. There are other things we can do in terms of the Community Planning Commission is looking, for example, at the Eisenhower Farms area and looking at perhaps acquiring some land there for park and recreational space. There's the Community Preservation Act put forth by the state. Unfortunately, that might be difficult for us to stomach right now because it involves some matching funds from the state based on to the extent that you extend property tax, essentially, an override, to acquire land for open space, affordable housing, recreation, uses such as that. I think to the extent that we could maybe work with developers, there are certain types of housing that probably, that do burden the tax base more than others, and perhaps not enough housing for our seniors. So to the extent that we can work with developers to develop more senior properties that would not bring children into North Reading to burden the school system, I think that we should work with developers and encourage them to do that and find ways to make it worth their while. If a household cannot support the cost of educating its children through the tax rate, which most cannot. If you have 3 children in a household, you're not paying for your children to go to the public school system in North Reading. You're not able to foot that bill. So to the extent that we maybe have to help developers or encourage them in some way to invest in something like senior housing that would not burden the tax base in that way, I would look to that and encourage that.
Kind of in keeping with that theme and talking about now, the growth at this point has created a need for more building of some sort or replacing what we have. What do you envision, or what is your vision for resolving the building needs that we have in town?
Overall, or particularly the school? Or?
Overall. I mean, there have been several plans put forward that include different departments. I mean, the town at different times has chosen to focus on specific areas, but what are your main areas of interest at this point? How would you go with those?
Well, I think it's important for us to look at an overall plan as the Facilities Use Master Plan Committee, better known as FUMP, attempted to do and got really pretty far along in the process. But again, because of some of the dissension in town and because maybe we didn't, FUMP didn't get quite far enough with the batch reuse that the master plan was not supported by town meeting, and again, too big, I shouldn't say town meeting, I guess question 9 is part of that, but not supported at the polls as question 9, but too big to get our arms around. I think the citizens and voters I've talked to want an overall plan. They want to see that there's not going to be a building left vacant somewhere in town or a big need not met, or only partially met. I think, again, it's going to be a domino effect, and what we first have to look is at the Elementary School Building Committee, look to them for their answer as to whether the batch is a viable renovation project. If it is, embark on that. Look back to rebuilding the police station in the center of town, and then look at the other needs. If none mean building a new building, while I think it's important to have a plan to the extent that you're on the level with voters about how much meeting all the needs is going to cost, you're probably not going to make a mistake of having something that's vacant or unplanned for. To the extent that batch renovation is not the answer, to the extent that the Elementary School Building Committee comes back and for some reason says that's not practical, then I think we really have to go back to a committee like FUMP to look at the whole plan and make sure that once the students move out of the batch, that something else will move into the batch, and that the domino effect will not leave us with